Hello, hello, and welcome to our weekly book club episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I'm your host, Amanda, and my lovely bookworm co-host is...
Hello, I'm Megan.
There she is. So if you have just stumbled upon us and you're thinking, how did I end up in a podcast book club? Welcome. Join us. We don't have our shit together, and we would love for you to join us here for that. Stick around. We're glad you're here, and we'll loop you in on how it works.
Yeah, definitely don't have our shit together. That's not the vibe of this podcast. If you want to feel bad about yourself by kind of comparing yourself to these like perfect homeschool mom we are not those people. We love homeschooling, but we are not by no stretch of the imagination perfect. We are real life people over here. That's our claim to fame, right? We keep it real. So if you're trying to figure out how book club works, number one, you don't even have to read the book. I mean, how real life of a book club is that, right? Like you don't even have to read the book. You can just come and listen to us. We talk about the book. We'll read our favorite parts. Amanda doesn't have a lot of favorite parts of this book, so you can listen to the parts she doesn't like, but
I'll still quote them so you can listen.
You'll still know what the book says. Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
This is our final episode on a book called Better Than College, written by Blake Boles. If you'd like to catch up on the previous episodes, feel free to check out our episode queue. We've got 2 other episodes on this topic.
Exactly. So, number 2, right? You don't have to read along with us, but if you would like to read along with us, the link to the book is in our podcast description. Full disclosure, it is an affiliate link. It doesn't cost you anything extra. We get a tiny little bit of commission from Amazon, truly like cents, not dollars, but it does help our podcast, right? It all adds up and it helps us pay for the software that we have to use for recording and editing and all that good jazz. So we appreciate your help. Thank you for the support. And yeah, you can actually use affiliate links for a whole assortment of things. You can check us out on our blog. They're there and they're also on our social media.
Yes.
But book club this week, the reading was really short. So if you're reading along with us, or if you're just like, oh, I can handle 30 pages, but I couldn't handle the 70 pages of last week, this is the perfect week. It's got it's kind of like a good like summary wrap up of what the rest of the book was for the most part. And it like directs you back to some things. So let's go ahead and dive in. The first chapter, it's not really broken down into chapters, but the section that we started with is called 14 Ways to Start Your Journey.
And I didn't really take any notes in this section because, like you said, it was just a recap of everything that we'd already read and that we had hashed out for the last 2 weeks. I did like the fact that there's a recap, right? So this book talks a lot about actionable steps and things that you can do. And so it's a to-do list. I love a good to-do list. I feel like if you are a young person who's reading this book, who's going to try this zero tuition college self-directed approach, having a to-do list is super helpful. So the formatting, I think, is great, but it's all stuff that we've already talked about in the book. So I didn't really make any notes on this section.
Yeah. So I made a few that were things that I felt that I pulled out that I was like, oh, I think that. So on page 109, sorry, I've got my book open on the wrong page. So I'm all like confused because my notes don't match up with my sticky notes. Wait a minute. All right. I'm there. So on page 109, number 5 talks about creating a zero tuition college assignment. If you've been following along, we know how I feel about that. But basically, the point of bullet 5 or point 5 is to set a goal and then map out baby steps to achieve it. And these baby steps, he recommends that the first one be something you can achieve within 5 minutes of finishing your writing session or this planning session that you're doing. The second one is something that you can finish within a day. And the third one is something you can finish within a week. And I just wanted to read these examples because I thought they were pretty good, like a very tangible example of what this would look like. So he's talking about you set your goal to live and work in New Zealand for 3 months, couch surfing and using volunteer sites to spend less than $500 per month. So an example would be the first one that you can finish within 5 minutes of this planning session that you're done is to create an account on couchsurfing.org. Then your second goal has to be something you can finish within that day, and that's research the cost of living in various parts of New Zealand. And then the third one, which is something you have to be able to finish within a week, is using information from travel guides and blogs, draft an anticipated monthly budget. And like I said, it's not groundbreaking. It's nothing new, but I thought that it was really helpful the way he actually broke that down. And I think that's one of those things that's useful no matter what you're doing, right? To remember this idea of these baby steps and to make one that you're going to do as soon as you finish and it can quickly be completed. Because the reality is psychology is real, and the psychology of knowing that you finished your first step, it motivates you to finish your second step. And if it's, this forward progress in a timely manner makes you much more likely to actually continue to progress, right? So I liked that.
And that's even, I think, even a bigger thing for some neurodivergent brains, right? That first step is monumental, even if it's a really small first step for most people, or even in reality, if it's a really small step, but kind of getting to the place where you can do that first step can be really daunting, sometimes more so, I think, for some neurodivergent people. So yeah, love that fact.
Yeah. Well, no, that's a great point. And that idea that the first step can and possibly even should be something you can finish within 5 minutes, like, that's
feels
great.
good. You feel like you're on a roll.
Yeah, like, why not set yourself up for success by remembering to make your first step something that's like, cha-ching, done, check. Okay, awesome, right? I'm here for it. So the next thing for me that I pulled out was on just in general, right? Page 112. So there's 14 things that he recommends, and he refers you back, go take the time to look at this, think about that, do a tangible exercise from this page and this section. And generally, I think that those are all fine things. But for me, I just kind of, as I read it and was thinking about it, again, because this is the wrap up, I was doing a lot of more big picture thinking, not like specifically these pull out things. And I really do think that with these last couple pages here of the 14 bullet points, you can do most of these things regardless of your situation, right? These aren't limited to teens forgoing university in favor of zero tuition college, even though that's what the book is about, right? I would argue that some of these tips you should do no matter where you end up after finishing your high school equivalent education. And quite a few of them, I thought they were really solid, like generally life tips for all teens and young adults who are trying to figure out what they're doing, and for middle-aged moms who are having a midlife crisis and trying to figure out what the hell they're going to do next because their kids are, they don't need them as much, but they've been out of the workforce for 10 or 15 years, and it seems kind of weird to try to go back to exactly what you were doing because you're not that mom anymore. And what am I, like, these are all great examples of like actionable things that you can and potentially should do to figure out your next step, whatever age.
Yeah, it's very true. I never even thought about it from the perspective of like going back into the workforce and stuff like that. So there's a lot of ways that this could be applied. I like it. Okay, so we're going to get into our next section, which is called Inspiration for the Road Ahead. And I've got this, I do have some notes finally. Before we do that, I just want to mention that we host a Patreon account. Every month we put a unit study over there that we have come up with based upon a theme of that month. So this is November. It's Aviation History Month, which is super exciting. So we've got a whole thing over there on aviation history. Last month we talked about the Jewish high holidays from a secular worldview perspective. September, we talked about the labor movement. So there's always something going on. And there's a free resource that's over there that even if you're not a Patreon subscriber, there's a unit study over there on hurricanes. So you can head over there and check it out. There's a link to it at the top of our website, which is homeschoolmomsunfiltered.com. You could also go to our link tree on Instagram. You could DM us. You could join our Facebook group and ask for it, whatever. We're more than happy to help you get there. Beyond the unit study, though, that all of our Patreon peeps get every single month, we have 2 live meetings every month where you can come hang out with Amanda and I. The first one is a Q&A session. So if you're looking for curriculum recommendations, or you're just starting and you're like, where the hell do I even begin, right? Or maybe you're getting ready for high school and you're scared shitless, like, come talk to us. We'll be more than happy to answer your questions, things that are specific to you that we might not necessarily answer fully to your situation during a general episode. Come. And then the other one is a mom's night out. kind of a happy hour vibe, kind of a social. Come make some homeschool mom friends. I mean, we've talked about the fact like we're recording this relatively close to the heels of the 2024 US election. Like finding secular homeschool mom friends and progressive homeschool mom friends so that you don't have to sit there and kind of let your eyes glaze over while people are spouting conspiracy theories at your local events. Find your people online. Come hang out with us over on Patreon. We would love to welcome you. And we know for many, budget is tight, but we try to keep it as affordable as possible at just either $7 or $12 a month. So we would love to welcome you.
Yeah.
Come on over.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, here in our house, we keep a pretty tight academic schedule, right? That difference in our styles. But I realized that I have a bunch of books that are hard to just work in to actually give them the focus that I want. And we have these great unit studies that we're putting together that we're giving to other people, but we're not actually using them in our own house because we don't unit study, generally speaking. And December is always like a hard month in homeschooling anyway, right? Like you just have so many things going on. And if you're someone like us where you keep a really strict schedule, generally speaking, and you're working away on curriculum and stuff, like it's hard to stay on top of that in December. So this year we've actually decided that we're just going to sit almost all of the curriculum to the side and we're going to focus on working through the unit studies. We're going to do these Patreon unit studies, kind of one each week as our main like study. It'll be a little bit more fun because it's a lot more videos than we usually do and some article reading and things like that. And so, yeah, there's lots of ways to use them. They're great resources and we very much recommend checking them out.
I feel like Aviation History Month is going to be like Winston's, like there's a bunch of good World War II in there and there's engineering mixed in and all kinds of stuff. I'm like, oh, this is going to be a hit.
It is. In fact, just Tuesday, he came home from his all-day drop-off class and was like, you know, I always do the like, oh, so did you learn anything new today? Like, what did you do? Because they go to like different museums and things like that, but we don't actually know where they're going each day. Like you just drop them off and they go somewhere. And so he got in, he was like, oh, we went to the Science Museum and we went to the Air and Space Museum and we did this and we did that. I was like, oh, that's cool. You know, did you actually get like lectures, like just like talks, or did you just walk around the museums? He's like, oh, we just walked around the museums this week. But I did learn about the Tuskegee Airmen, and I was like, well, that's great because I have some stuff for you to learn more about them. So yeah, I'm like, oh, that's working out nicely.
Okay, so you'll have to tell him.
I don't plan that well.
I met a Tuskegee Airman in the airport one time. I was boarding a flight in Miami, and there was a gentleman getting off that plane that I was about to get on. And you know those black veteran hats that have like the bars on them that I don't know military culture in that way. So yeah. But I know like they're representative of things, right? And it'll say like Vietnam War or whatever. And his said Tuskegee Airmen. And when I tell you, it would be like a Swiftie meeting Taylor Swift, right? Because I'm just like a massive history nerd, right? And I literally couldn't form sentences. And I was like, oh my goodness. I'm like so shocked and honored to be meeting you. And he goes, are you shocked that I'm still alive? Because they fought during World War II. And like he could tell that I was like fumbling all over myself. And I was like, no. And I was like, but thank you so much for your service. I was like, oh my gosh, I just met a Tuskegee Airman. What they did was so incredible. You know, like just absolutely incredible. So you'll have to tell Winston that I met a Tuskegee Airman and it was just like, I mean, we're talking, I think this was like 7 years ago now. And I still like can visualize where I was standing. Like that's how big it was in my world. So it's good.
Yeah, that's fun. And if you're at all interested in the actual unit study that we put together, we have a book recommendation where an actual Tuskegee Airman actually wrote a book, and we have that recommendation in there with some other ones. So yeah, anyway, that's fun. And I will pass that on.
Yeah.
All right. So back to our book, we have the next section is called Inspiration for the Road Ahead. It starts, the actual text starts on page 115. So it starts, this whole section, he's got lots of quotes and snippets from people encouraging self-directed learning, right? And people who support this idea that he has about self-directed learning. He does say upfront that some of them are pro-college and some of them are not. But in reading through this, one of the things that really stood out to me was just how many of these people have prestigious college degrees. Right. It also really got me thinking how many of these people that he quotes grew up in liberal, well-educated households where critical thinking was common and taught by example? Because I really feel like that part of my concern with this idea that, like, hey, you can forgo college or you can forgo university and do wonderful things in the world and be an amazing person, for me, it kind of gets hampered by this idea that, like, you have to develop critical thinking skills and you have to be exposed to a world beyond what you knew growing up. And my personal experience was that it's very easy to not be exposed beyond the world that you grew up in and to not have critical thinking skills and, to go directly into a trade or to go directly into whatever it is that you're going to do and to not have your horizons broadened at all. And it just feels like, to me, you have a lot of people recommending the fact that you don't need it, but maybe they were coming from those kind of, I don't really want to say special circumstances, but those unique homes, right? Where you're having good discussions and you're being encouraged to think about both sides and you're being educated about both sides. And, well, this side, or not even both sides, multiple sides, right? That whole
Mm-hmm.
thing. I don't know. Yeah, that was my overall, like, kind of my overarching with this part.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is, like, I think too, there's this anti-college movement that's stirring in the US now as well, because there's this mindset that if you send your kids to college, they will be liberal brainwashed and they'll be taught to hate their country and this, that, and the other thing. So I feel like if you've come from a household like that, which is the opposite of what you're talking about, as far as, like, one of these critical thinking and all sides proactively communicated households. But I feel like the college experience that those kids that are coming from those households, they're not going to a university where they're going to be exposed to a wide ideology and various viewpoints and a beautiful melting pot and stuff like
Oh,
that.
see, I disagree. I disagree wholeheartedly.
Well, I
I
think
was
now,
raised
though,
so conservative.
but I think
Yeah,
now,
but I mean, yeah,
because now it's this
I
whole, like, they're being brainwashed in college and stuff like that, and it's become part of that
but
Fox News
that
diatribe.
crap was said when I was growing up. That crap was said.
Really?
I mean, that this is not new in the Midwest, in the sticks, in the red areas. Like, this idea that, like, well, only the lawyers and the doctors send their kids to college and they're going to be liberal anyway. So, that's fine. But, don't send the other kids to college because they're not liberal and they don't need to be liberal.
Right.
Like, you don't need to go let them be brain. Man,
I
I
know.
don't know.
I mean, I had done some
But yeah.
research about accreditation for colleges not that long ago, just
Mhm.
personal wonderings and musings and things like that, right? And the list of unaccredited schools is largely made up of schools that potentially couldn't be accredited because of their ideology, right? And so it's like, these are the
Mhm.
schools where I feel like those people who are in a really sheltered environment, who don't want their kids exposed to this dangerous ideology, and they're going to come out anti-American and this, that, and the other thing. I feel like those are the schools where those kids end up more often, potentially. I don't know, but I
Yeah,
don't
it'd
know.
be interesting to know the numbers
Yeah,
on
I
that.
don't know
Yeah,
that they're going to
it'd
end
be
up
interesting to see.
getting that really broad, worldly, diverse experience, because I have the feeling as the United States becomes more polarized, there's less openness to sending your kids to those environments, right? But I could be totally wrong. I have no idea. I didn't grow up in the same environment that you did. I didn't go away to college like you did. Like, I mean, I have my college degree, but I got it while I was working and, all of that stuff. So, like, I just have a really different experience with college than you've had, where it was like super transformative for you. And for me, it was like, I'll get this piece of paper because I should probably get this piece of paper, right? Like it wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's it. It was, yeah,
Yeah.
for
So
sure.
it'd be
So
interesting.
you got something else out of page 115. What did you get?
Okay. So I made a book list because, which I kind of did from the beginning of this book
Of
as well.
course you did. Of course you
I'm
did.
going to put all these books in season 2 and make you read, and you'll be like, oh my gosh, for fuck's sake, if she makes me read
People
one more of
stop
these books.
listening to our book club because they're like, that lady, she said she's the silver lining lady, but all she does is bitch and moan about books.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, give me some werewolf smut, damn it. I can't read any more of this unschooling nonsense.
So there's different people featured in the section, and one of them was this guy, Daniel Pink, and his first book was called Free Agent Nation. And it says he was the first to really advocate for unschooling as a form of entrepreneurial education. Entrepreneurship has been huge in our homeschooling journey. So I was like, well, now I want to read Free Agent Nation. So I liked that. And then there was a quote from that book down below a little bit that said, so it's talking about, I highlighted one section, but I'll back up just a little bit to give a little bit more context. So it talks about the fact that, like, in the corporate world, for example, if you hit your quarterly numbers or something, you stop, right? Like that's it. And so it's about doing the bare minimum, for example, right? And so the quote is, greatness and nearsightedness are incompatible. Meaningful achievement depends on lifting one's sights and pushing toward the horizon. And I just love these kind of cheesy quotes that you would see like on a poster in a boardroom. Like I love that stuff. I find it super meaningful. So I think that's true. I will say, right, having worked in the corporate world and my husband having worked, you know, for a massive corporation and all that stuff, right? Like there is this like, okay, I've hit my goal and it's the second to last day of the month. Like I'm going to throttle what I do for the next day and a half because all it's going to do is bump up my sales goal for the following month and make it that much harder. Like if I can hold a couple of orders over till the next month and set myself up for success there. So I was like, oh, I've experienced what he's saying here, you know, which does make perfect sense. Whereas if I'm out for myself in an entrepreneurial type setup, I would never throttle anything like that. So I did think that there was some truth to what was there. And you know, I like the good cheesy quotes where you have like, you know, a sunset and, you know, some life quote on it. I'm all about those. So I liked that part.
Though I would argue that you probably do throttle occasionally. Like, you know, like if you're setting up opportunities, you're going to try to spread them out instead of like, oh, well, all of these opportunities came at me in the same month, so I'll just stick them all in the same month, right? You're going to be like, okay, well, all of these opportunities came to me. Is there a way to spread them out so that I can both benefit financially from them and also give them all of my time and focus, right? So I'm not sure. I think everyone throttles, even entrepreneurs and successful people. But yeah, okay. I know you like your cheesy quote.
I do. I love a good
I'll
quote.
give you your cheesy quote.
Yeah, you know, I'm a big fan of like framing them and putting them in the house and stuff like that. So I like that. And then on 116, nice. I added yet another book to my book list, which I feel like would be.
All right. Well, we'll get to that in a minute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right.
We'll
We'll get to
have
him
one
in a
beforehand.
minute.
Go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. you're jumping the gun on
I'm excited about my to be read list.
So, yeah, I know. So at the top of page 116, he highlights Tina Selig, I think. Selig, something like that. I'm not 100% sure how you pronounce her name. We've discussed this before. I'm terrible with names. It's not my strong suit. So she has a quote. It says, quote, "In fact, real life is the ultimate open book exam. The doors are thrown wide open, allowing you to draw on endless resources around you as you tackle open-ended problems related to work, family, friends, and the world at large." And for me, it's one of those things, like, I think it's a great quote. I think it's totally true and accurate. And, you know, I like the quote. I like the idea behind it. I also think it's important to understand that she has a prestigious degree for both undergrad and grad school. Like, great quote, great idea from someone who absolutely did not do zero tuition college.
I love. Did you Google all the people and all their degrees while you were reading?
not all of them, but at least half of them. And I was like, this is getting ridiculous. I'm like, I did stop, right? Like, it's like, this is, yeah. Okay. And so then the next one that is highlighted after Tina, last name not entirely sure, is John Taylor Gatto.
I think
Is that
so.
how you say
That's
it?
how
Gatto?
I say
Gatto?
it. I can't tell you I'm right, but that's how I say it.
Yeah. And, you know, I know he's like legend status when it comes to like homeschooling and unschooling and this whole thing. So I'm a little scared of the pitchforks that are going to come my way when I rag on him. But I'm going to rag on him anyway.
Virtual pitchforks are easy to dodge. Like, I mean,
They are kind of. So first off, he has this quote, like in his quote, there's this thing, and he's talked about it before in something he's published, right, where he points out that a hot dog vendor in New York City makes more than like a corporate executive and the president of the United States combined. And I'm just like, okay, what's the story behind that? So of course I go research it because I'm like, that seems really far-fetched. And the reality is that yes, apparently the licenses, the fees, the permits, all of that jazz to be a vendor in New York City, like a street vendor in New York City, can cost as much as $300,000 a year. So in order to make any kind of profit, they guesstimate that you have to make over $425,000 a year, because by the time you pay out all of your profits and you pay for your electricity and you pay for your employees and your card and your insurance and all of those things, to like make any profit, you have to make like $500,000 a year, really. And that the average vendor is actually really not making a huge profit from it. But yes, okay, like they do have to make a lot of money to have any profit. But that's not the same as being like, oh, a hot dog vendor makes more than the president and a CEO combined. Like, those are not the same thing. The CEO or the president is not paying $300,000 out of their own pocket for their permits annually, kind of thing, right? Like, I was like, I did not appreciate that.
CEO salaries are such BS too, right? Because the salaries that CEOs make aren't even the bulk of their income, right? I mean,
$200,000 a year and $27 million in bonuses.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, right? Unless you're like the CEO of, like Ted's Appliances in town or something, like then maybe. Yeah. But yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then like the second thing for me in his quote was he talks about the importance of critical thinking, which again is another one of those things. Like a lot of these quotes, there are things in there that I'm like, yeah, I totally agree with that. I think critical thinking is really important. But I also think that college forces better critical thinking, more critical thinking than the vast majority of other situations that young adults find themselves in straight out of high school. I think they're not getting it nearly enough in high school.
No.
And when you finish high school, I don't know where you're going or what you're doing that you're getting a real life education in critical thinking. I feel like all you have to do is look at the 2024 election in the United States and see that people don't have any critical thinking skills. Like they're not getting those skills. They're not learning them. They're not learning how to use them. And so I just disagree with that generally. Like I have no issue with trade schools and apprentice type situation and things like that. And we absolutely need people to do those kinds of jobs. I just don't think you're going to learn a significant amount of critical thinking skills going directly into trade school type things like that and stuff where you're actually doing exactly what it is you want to do that's hands-on. Where are you being forced to think about social issues that you haven't seen or, racial issues, economic issues, all of these kinds of things. I don't think it's there. And then the third was like, okay, sure. Weapons of mass instruction and public school is terrible and education needs a huge revamp as he sits on top of his education from Cornell, Columbia, and Berkeley, just to name a few. Like, okay.
And I'm done. My note from that section was I would like to read Weapons of Mass Instruction, and I would like to read it as part of our book club during season 2. But I'll tell you why. I agree with what you said about the hot dog vendor and the whole thing. But I feel like it's one of those books, to your point, like because he's like this establishment figure in the homeschool world. It was like our first book club book was Teach Your Own by John Holt, right? And and people talk about John Holt the same way as they do John Taylor Gatto, right? It was like,
Yeah.
oh, and overall we freaking hated that book for the most part, right? I mean, there's always little things you can pull out and whatever, but generally speaking, it's not a book I would recommend to anyone.
Yeah, like if you want to unschool, maybe don't start there.
So, right. I mean, I'm an unschooler and I read that book and was like, what the fuck? Right. So, but this Weapons of Mass Instruction is one of those books that gets thrown around all the time. Right. And so I feel like even if we maybe don't love it, it's one of those things that's like playing Trivial Pursuit. We talk about like facts you should just know in life. And so it's like, if you're going to function in the homeschool space and have these conversations, we should at least read it for ourselves and get a feel for John Taylor Gatto firsthand. So that was my takeaway from that section, was like, I may not love the book, but I feel like we should read it. Just saying.
All right. I mean, I stuck in the new menopause for the next session, so I suppose I can read Weapons of Mass Instruction.
I'll totally read about menopause. Maybe it'll tell me why my pelvic floor is getting worse by the day. Like,
yeah.
I'm all about it.
True story.
Yeah.
All right. So my next comment was on page 118 and 119. So I have no idea how you pronounce this guy's name.
No.
William Deresiewicz. I don't know. I'm so
Deresiewicz.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I'm not sure. But basically, he's a former Yale English professor who is critical of elite education. And like, at this point, I'm like, I know I'm just repeating myself, right? But how many successful people with college educations from quite elite universities are we going to hold up as beacons for doing what they say, not what they do, right? Like, I'm not real big on that. Like, do as I say, not as I do. Like, you should totally not get the degree that I got that has led to my success. And you can have the same kind of success that I had, but without the degree that I got and the knowledge that I got with the degree that I got. Like, I'm struggling. Well, I'm going to be honest, I'm struggling.
And I love that we both called out this line in here where it says, you can live comfortably in the United States as a school teacher or a community organizer or a civil rights lawyer or an artist. And I was like, I mean, I stopped at school teacher.
And he goes on, that is by any reasonable definition of comfort. I was like,
no.
Reasonable
no, I mean,
yeah.
And it says you have to live in an ordinary house instead of an apartment in Manhattan or a mansion in LA. And I'm like, our school teachers, now mind you, okay, so I don't even think that school teachers could do that 12 years ago when this book was written, or whenever, I don't know when he said this necessarily, but this book was written in about 12 years ago. But especially now with inflation the way it is and teacher salaries being as stagnated as they have been for as long as they have been, right? I mean, one of my kids' teachers from their brief stint in public school is like doing like an MLM to try to make it, and she's married and her husband has an income and all that too, right? Like it's not like, no, you cannot survive on a teacher's salary. You just cannot, especially if you have student loans or anything like that got you your teaching job, right? Or that was a precursor to or a stepping stone to, right? There's no way you can live comfortably on. And I'm not sure that was true 12 years ago, but it's definitely not true now.
Oh, that's right. No. Yeah, that's it. And that was the thing for me. So I know in the early to mid 2000s, I lived in the Appalachian Mountains and I was working 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet. And one of those jobs, well, actually I was working 3.5 part-time jobs to make ends meet. One of them was on the weekends at a real estate agency. And another one was like an on-call substitute teacher. And then in the mornings, I worked at a methadone clinic before things started, like in the back office. And then in the afternoons, I worked at an after-school program for at-risk kids. And so the substitute teaching occasionally happened in between my other 2 jobs. Like it was full on. But at that time, right, the number of teachers I knew who were like desperate to try to find a home, and they
Yeah.
absolutely could not find a home in the Appalachian
I was going to say,
Mountains
we're not talking
because
Manhattan and LA.
you
This
could
is
like,
Western freaking North
yeah,
Carolina, right?
yeah, you know, I mean, it's that thing. And I know here in SoCal, like Winston, my kiddo, went to school and was in a brick and mortar school for a little while, and they lost their PE teacher because he was making the standard 55,000 a year, and you know, his wife was going on maternity leave, which at best gets paid at 60%.
Mhm.
And they knew that they couldn't stay in the city. So they bought a place out in Temecula, which is in SoCal, is kind of an area where a lot of people go. Like, you can still get a house out there, but it's over an hour drive, right? And so he's commuting back and forth, but the commute is killing him, and it's not good for family work-life balance.
Mhm.
And, you know, I mean, like they were not trying to live in a fancy apartment or a mansion in LA. Like, I mean, a mansion in LA. Like, I just saw, yeah,
It's
no,
yeah,
we'll
it's
just leave it at
very
that.
removed
Just
from
no.
reality, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then I have a note on that same page on 119 from this guy, Seth Godin. And I did think it was interesting. He's got some blogs. Blake has some blog posts that Seth Godin has written that he recommends. And full disclosure, I read my book at dinner tonight before we podcasted. So I've hit my T-Mobile international data allowance, which means that I've been throttled and my phone is like a 1989 brick phone. So I haven't had a chance to Google these yet, but there's one here. He wrote a blog post called Buying an Education or Buying a Brand. And just the title of that intrigued me enough that I will definitely be reading it, because I'm like, I mean, I've said it throughout this entire book, right? I agree with so much of the philosophy in this book, but I don't know how applicable it is in the real world. But I was like, that concept of building a brand around yourself as an employee based upon the degrees that you hold. And I was like, oh, that is kind of an interesting way of looking at it. So adding that to my to be read list as well. I'm sure it's high on your to be read list, Amanda, on top of things. We'll
Totally.
compare.
Hmm.
The next thing that I have is on page 120. Oh, here's another name for you. Anya Kamenetz. That one wasn't too bad. I might have screwed it up. But she, in 2009, she heralded the end of college as we know it in her book DIYU, and she's got a whole bunch of stuff here. So I thought it was interesting. She said, if you were starting at a top university today, what would it look like? Would you start by gathering the very best minds from around the world, from every discipline? Since we're living in an age of abundant, not scarce information, you'd curate the lectures carefully with a focus on the new and original, rather than offer a course on every possible topic. You'd create a sustainable economic model by focusing on technological rather than physical infrastructure, and by getting people of means to pay for a specialized experience. You'd also construct a robust network so people could access resources whenever and from wherever they like. And you'd give them the tools to collaborate beyond the lecture hall. If you did all that, well, you'd have TED, meaning the TED Talks, right? And I am obsessed with TED Talks. I absolutely love them. They were instrumental even in my decision to homeschool many, many years ago, watching, Sir Ken Robinson and Jeffrey Canada and Logan LaPlante and all of those ones, right? I love them. And I'm like, again, like you said, you sound like a broken record. I'm like, I'm totally broken recording here, right? Like, I think all of that's true. I think it's amazing. But I also think that it could limit you down the road if you've taken your own road less traveled, as opposed to the socially not socially acceptable, but kind of the social norm, right? If for lack of a better word. So anyway, broken record here too.
Yeah, well, I mean, I enjoyed that. I too enjoy TED Talks. We have my kiddos a little younger, so we do watch TED Talks, but we use the TED Ed videos, and that's a required daily thing. We start every day with watching a TED Ed video and explore more if we want or whatever. I'm pro all of those things, but I do think that just watching an interesting video is not enough, right? Like, she talks about, if you gave them an opportunity to like collaborate beyond the lecture hall, you'd have TED. Like, I don't know where the general collaboration is happening when you sit and watch a TED video, right? Like, and I think that that's a huge part of what comes out of college, right? Like that, like the exchange, the talking, the sharing, the like someone else saying like, okay, but have you thought about it from this perspective, right? Or like, well, I see what you're saying, but also what about this, you know, or like, and that doesn't happen when you just watch it on your own,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how interesting the video is.
Off topic.
Or if you
Sorry.
dive into the comment section.
Off topic, but I don't know that you'll have stumbled across it if you're just doing the TED Ed so far. But have you seen the one where the guy trades a paperclip for a house? Because I feel like that's like right up your kid's alley.
Oh,
Okay.
I haven't seen
It's
that one.
super fun. I can't promise you there's no cursing in it because it's been a while since I've watched it, but I know you don't really mind so much anyway, but it's really freaking good. So anyway, just to maybe you throw it in coming up soon. It might be a fun one for you.
All right.
All right. So you have thoughts on Peter Thiel.
I do. I mean, besides having strong personal negative feelings about him, in this specific instance, he's talking about how Harvard isn't all that great. And then, you know, that is counterbalanced by the fact that Homeboy went to Stanford for his undergrad and law degree. And I'm like, I don't know how you want me to take you seriously. I mean, first off, everyone knows that Stanford and Harvard do not a good relationship make. Like, of course, Stanford dude's going to shit on Harvard. It would mean more if he was like, Stanford's not that special. But he didn't say Stanford's not that special. He's all, Harvard's not that special. So
it'd be interesting if he applied to Harvard too and didn't get in, right? Be like, oh my gosh. Okay, so I see what you're saying. The one thing that I thought was interesting was it said if Harvard were really the best education, if it makes that much difference, why not franchise it so more people can attend? Why not create 100 Harvard affiliates? It's something about the scarcity and the status. In education, your value depends on other people failing. And so I thought that was interesting from the perspective of when we look at education in democratic socialist countries like Finland or Sweden, where every school is proposed to be the same. I mean, of course, I feel like the leadership of a school is going to apply a certain personality to a school and things like that. But in the US, so much of your education opportunity is linked to your socioeconomic status. If I can afford a $900,000 house in this suburb, my kid's most likely going to get a better education than if I'm renting an apartment in the worst area in town, but that's what I can afford. And so we have that in the US, but in other countries, you can live in any neighborhood, supposedly, and your kids should be able to get a comparable education, whether you are a CEO making, mega bucks and bonuses, or whether your mom is a single mom who's working in a cafeteria, right? You should have access, at least in the younger years, should have access to the same level of education. And so I thought that's a pretty interesting concept, actually, of this Harvard affiliate thing. Like, why do we have schools that are so much better or revered in such ways? And then we have other schools that aren't as much. And so it just kind of made me think of that twist of like in other countries, schools are more equitable. So from that perspective, I thought it was an interesting point. I'm not saying I love Peter Thiel. I'm just saying I thought that was an interesting point or an interesting note to ponder.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily have an issue with that, right? I mean, I definitely fall more in line with democratic socialist ideology in a lot of ways. It's just, again, for me, you have this very conservative, outspoken GOP capitalist saying, look at education in democratic socialist countries. And like, oh, screw you. You don't want that. Like, you just want people to not be educated. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and in fairness, he didn't say democratic socialist countries. I did, but like he was circling the concept.
But that's what he's, yeah. I mean, that's what he's getting at, right?
Exactly.
This idea of like, oh, it shouldn't be only for the elite. It shouldn't this, it shouldn't that. Like, okay, except that's totally not what you stand for and what you believe in and where you're putting all of your millions and millions of dollars towards, right?
Exactly.
So like, why am I going to believe you? Like, why? Yeah.
All right, 122. Okay, there's a thing here, Michael Ellsberg. I sound like you, Amanda, now in my notes on this section. So he's talking about this situation where there's like miles and miles of job seekers standing in employment breadlines in the same suit with the same college diploma, begging for the same job, holding their outstretched arms with expectant hopes, etc. And he's saying like, well, it's very simple. If you are different from those people because you're not standing there with your same college diploma, then and you don't have the same standardized credentials, that you'll stand out in some way. And my point was, like, I get what he's trying to say, but I think the reality of the situation is the person who gets that job is going to have a degree, but will also have an in at the company and will also know someone. And that's how, because we've talked about it, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And, you know, I mean, business is as dirty and incestuous as it possibly gets. I've said it before. When I worked in corporate America, I have like two of my best girlfriends. We worked together for forever, and we're still very good friends, right? Like best of friends after a decade of us not working together. And we would sit back, right? They would put out these company-wide promotion announcements. And so we would sit back and we'd be like, oh my God, he fucking got promoted again. Like, I've literally never seen this dude do a day of work ever. And every time there's a company, and he's being taken care of by someone, right? And then it's like people that were actually like, it was just so demoralizing. And so like, no matter what you did, it wasn't going to matter unless you had that connection. And whatever it was, I don't know what dirt he had on somebody, but this dude, every freaking time he turned around, he was getting a promotion. And I never saw the guy do a day of work and like in the 10 years that I worked there. And so I'm not really sure that having different credentials is going to work. I think it's who you're golfing with, who you're drinking with, who you're playing poker with, you know, all of that, unfortunately, is how business freaking works if you're in that traditional world. So,
yeah, especially in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
I can't speak to other countries, but especially in the United States, right? It's 100%. Still very much a good old boys club, and so much happens on the golf course and that kind of
drinks and, you know, I mean, I know for my husband, you know, what do you do? Like, he'd be traveling. Oh, we're deep sea fishing today, and we're doing. I'm like, what the fuck kind of work is deep sea fishing? Like, that's what it was, right? You know, I mean. He was in it to win it. He knew it. So at the bottom, there's something here from Penelope Trunk. And I did like this quote. The best thing you can do for yourself is to figure out who you are and where you fit in the world. No one teaches you that in school. You need to do it for yourself. And I think especially that's true in high school, to your point, Amanda, before, like there's not a lot of critical thinking going on if you have a traditional high school environment and things like that. But I think that doesn't necessarily, it's not an argument for or against college in my mind. It's just everyone needs to figure out who they are. And I think it's possible for you to also go through 4 years of college and have no freaking clue who you are because you're, you know, running the popularity club and, you know, whatever else. And, you know, I mean, did you see, I know we talked about it in a chat group that you and I are both in, but like this year I saw it. I've never seen this before. This year I saw it like constantly. Part of that's the algorithm, right? Like once you start watching something and then it's like, oh, she likes it, let's give her more. But I was more or less watching it because it was a train wreck, right? So there were two sets of videos. One was like dorm room makeovers and stuff like that. And there were moms that were hiring decorators for dorm rooms. Talk about like status and all this ridiculousness. And then the other thing were these rush outfits that, especially at like in Alabama and like all the like old Southern schools and stuff like that. And these girls are standing there and it'd be like, you know, they'd like show the skirt and the words would be on the screen. Lululemon skirt, like $300. And this bangle bracelet was $700. And like, I'm standing there and I'm like, what the fuck kind of college experience is it? Like, hello. It was just the most bananas thing ever. And I have a hard time thinking that if you're going through college, and maybe I'm wrong, but I have a hard time thinking that if you're going through college, just focused on how expensive your sorority rush outfit can be, that you're probably not having this deep, meaningful, like getting to know your soul searching experience that at the end you're going to come out knowing who you truly are. Right. And so, yeah, I think, you know, and your mom has hired a decorator to Lily Pulitzer your room in the South. I don't know, but not to say it couldn't happen, but I feel like in any environment, like that's the most important thing, is to figure out who you are and what you're all about and what makes you tick. And you'll just be more successful in life. And that can take a really long time. I mean, there's grownups trying to figure out who the hell they are still, and that's totally fine too. So.
Yeah, that's true. Going, into the family business doesn't help you figure out who you are, right? There, like, it's just important to
Takes time
to carve out that time and figure that out. Yeah, I agree with that. So the next person he highlights, again, James Altucher, or maybe Altucher. I'm not sure.
You just
choose your own adventure on his name. Poor guy. He'll never listen to us, so at least we've got that going for us.
And if he does, you have far worse things to do to say about him than to mispronounce his name
and to mess up his name. Oh man. Okay, so first off, I will say, right, it's this idea, like, here's a basic assignment, take $10,000, get yourself to India, check out the world, learn about it, like, firsthand. Like, okay, fine. The introduction for him is that he writes poignantly and irreverently against college as a graduate from Cornell University. Like, I am a broken record at this point, but, like, sure, do as I say, not as I do. Like, okay. All right, got it. Check. Message received.
Okay, I took from that, there's a line in there about going to India. There's a whole paragraph about going to India. And there's a line in there that says, if you're going to throw up, you might as well do it from dysentery rather than drinking too much at a frat party. And that, I feel like, just embodies not many, but multiple instances in our homeschool journey. Sometimes we'll just do something and, like, the plan goes off the rails, like, so badly. And I'll say to the kids, like, life skills, problem solving. My kids are looking at me and being like, I have a hard time figuring out in what scenario this life skill is going to be useful. And, like, we're laughing and joking and all that kind of stuff. But that's totally what that reminded me of. I shared a while ago when we were trying to sell our house, and my daughter had gone up into the attic because we were trying to, like, fix a vent fan that was, like, loose before we had this really big showing. Like, somebody who had flown in from California to look at the house, and she was up in the attic trying to help. I was down below fixing it, and she was up above fixing it, and we were doing great, and we get it fixed, and we were, like, so proud of ourselves. And then she fell through the ceiling, and then, like, she didn't get hurt. If you missed the episode, only part of her fell through the ceiling. She was fine. But then we had, like, this huge hole in the drywall and everything, and we were up all night fixing the drywall, and the whole night I'm like, life skills, and my daughter was like, I'm not sure any circumstance where this life skill becomes essential. And I'm like, just roll with it, So I thought the dysentery thing, that's totally something that I would be like, life skills, and my kids would just roll their eyes at me. So I liked it.
Okay, Mom.
Okay, the next note that I have, so Steve Jobs is here, 124, 125. There's a thing in here from Steve Jobs, which, from a personal perspective, Steve Jobs was a deeply flawed human being. He's an interesting cat if you, like, really dig into him and all that kind of stuff. Like, people love to, like, revere Steve Jobs, and he was brilliant and all of that, but he was also kind of a whack job human being in a lot of ways, who, like, had a kid that he refused to acknowledge, and, a whole bunch of other stuff. So anyway, but there's a thing in here, and it comes from his commencement address that I think was at Stanford, if I'm not mistaken. I've watched the video. I just don't remember the name. Is it in the
it does say
commencement address at Stanford? Yeah. There, it's in the footnote. Okay. So he talks about the fact that he went to Reed College, which was super expensive, and he was adopted. His parents couldn't afford Reed, but that's where he went, and he ends up dropping out. And he says, the minute I dropped out and I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me, I began dropping in on the ones that looked interesting. And it's interesting. I haven't watched this speech in a while. I have watched it multiple times, but there's a thing where he talks about the fact that at the time, Reed College had one of the best calligraphy programs in the country. And he started going to calligraphy classes. And there's a line in the commencement address that says, like, that it was a skill that had no hope of practical application in my life. And that might be true. He said, like, the signs on campus were all hand calligraphied and beautiful. But later, he talked about the fact that all of what he had learned about fonts and serif and sans serif and all this kind of, like, history of fonts and the artistry of font, it went into Apple. So, like, the marketing and the actual font choices that are on like the iPhone and stuff like that. And so I was like, I just love those. Like, I'm an unschooler, right? So that concept of like, it had no hope of practical application, but you enjoyed it. And so you learned it. But then the practical application comes later because it was something that you were interested in and passionate about. So, I love that shit. So, I was going to pull that out of there because that's like right up my alley. But, I'm guessing you didn't take that from the same thing, but it's all good.
No.
You're like, I don't really
No,
care
I mean,
what
I
font
was
is on my
like,
phone.
well, for me, I was like, he went to a 4-year university. And in my personal experience, my first 3 months at university were the most life-changing for me. Right, because I went from a very small conservative town of 2,500 people in the middle of the farmlands, and I went to Chicago to a big university in the city. And like, even though it was a Catholic university, like, it was a completely different environment. And my professors, like, I was in a bunch of gen ed type classes and things like that. And like, you were just, every time you said something, you had to speak. And every time you spoke, your professors pushed you to think of it differently or to consider something else. And it was that first time that I was ever really faced with this requirement to think outside of what I had thought. And so I'm like, yeah, sure, lots of famous people that we like to hold up dropped out after X number of months in university, but they still had that experience of that like intense pushing back on what they thought they knew. So I was like, well, I mean, okay, like, you just supported my beliefs on why university is so important. So, okay. Like,
And I'm all about iPhone fonts, but it's all good. That's where our different
I mean, I do
perspectives
like
come
my
in handy.
All right, so that brings us, we're almost done. There's one last, it's not quite a full page, but there's one last thing. It's called final inspiration. And then everything after that is like acknowledgments, which is a huge list of people. And then like an index and a few other, like little things to read. So on page 127, with the final inspiration, for me, it really got me thinking about whether or not education should only be about what you want to learn. And I know that this is going to be one of those things where there are different schools of thought, especially in homeschooling. But I don't think so. I think that for education to be good, you have to learn more than just what you want to learn or what you know that you want to learn. I think you have to be pushed to see things and learn things past your comfort zone. I mean, obviously, like, much of this is based on my personal experience, right? I've alluded to that throughout this book, the whole discussion of all of this book, but I was raised fairly religiously and very conservatively. I mean, I was a hardcore Republican, worked on Republican campaigns before I went to university, like volunteered and we hosted Republican governors, I mean, like, hardcore Republican. And moving to Chicago for university completely changed that for me. And it opened my mind up so much to so many things from like my very first week of classes, right? Like my first week of class, we did a thing where we had to, every day we went to a different house of worship for a different religious group, from a synagogue to the Baha'i temple to like just to all of these different things, and made a point of eating in that neighborhood. And like we spent the whole day around there, and it just completely changed what I knew about the world. And so, I mean, that thing, yeah, I think a 4-year degree might be an almost essential part of the equation for success for a lot of young people in the United States in today's world. Like it or not, having that 4-year degree is fairly important in a lot of job seeking situations. But I think that even a couple semesters of university that can just push you beyond your comfort zone, right? That can say, okay, well, you were always taught this about the Black experience in America, but do you actually have any idea what it is? Or your state doesn't allow anyone to teach about slavery and the fact that people were actually enslaved. I mean, the nonsense out there, Trump saying that he's going to take the endowments of universities that are still using DEI and use it to pay back white people who were discriminated against because of DEI, like basically reparations for white people in the United States. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, but if that's what you were taught and that's what you learned and you grew up thinking that, like, I just feel like you're not going to necessarily seek out information beyond or outside of that. And that's why it's so important to go to a university where someone has some interest in pushing you to think of something else or to see more. I don't know. Yeah.
I know. I'm just struggling to think that somebody who believes that white people deserve reparations in America is going to end up at any university that's going to teach. Like, I can't fathom how their path ends up there at this point, because we've just become so polarized. That would be so far outside of their interest, what's allowed, their knowledge that it even exists.
Yeah, but I have, like, I don't know how many people are listening to us and have like one of those baby groups, right? Did you join any of the baby groups online for like your kid's going to be born in, May of 2012? And so you find a group and you stay with them. And within that mom group, I know several women who are much more liberal now. And they were raised in this, like, we went and we protested at abortion clinics as teenagers when you were on this conservative track and you were raised this way and you did all of this nonsense. And then as you grew up, like, you learned more. And for most of us, it was that we went to college or university, and not all of us finished, but still that idea of like, yeah, you went for one reason or another, like one of the women became a nurse and those kinds of things. So yeah.
I mean, I hope that's the case.
I think it's possible. I think, yeah, I mean, I think it still happens. I do. I haven't lost hope in the fact that there are teenagers who know that they want some kind of a job. They're still conservative, maybe evangelical Christians or whatever, but they know they want a job that requires a college degree. And when they get to college, they see things a little bit differently. We just need it to be more than 10% of a graduating class, which is what it was where I'm from. I mean, when only 10% of the graduating class actually goes on to get any sort of education.
Right.
Well, I won't say any sort of education, any sort of recognized university education. It's not hard to see why critical thinking skills are on the decline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a problem. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, this is our final episode of our very first season, Amanda. How exciting is that?
Yeah, but the thing is, you keep saying it's the final episode. I don't want people to tune out and think that we don't have anything, because we're recording stuff and stuff is dropping every week. You'll have normal Tuesday, Thursday content from us. It just won't be quite as long and quite as intensive because everyone has a lot going on. So you'll be able to tune in, but it won't be the full like hour and 15-minute episodes, but there'll still be episodes twice a week, every week, all the way through.
We have some awesome topics.
So we're not actually really going anywhere. Yeah. We have a lot of fun stuff that we're recording for you. We're just setting it up so that we don't have to have such massive recording sessions every week
over the holidays
during the holiday season.
Exactly.
Yeah, while we're all just trying to survive.
And then we come back with season 2. We've already got a bunch of our books picked out, and we have an author visit that's like right at the start of season 2. So super exciting. Amber O'Neill Johnston's coming on, who I am like personally gonna fangirl over so hardcore. Like, I just want to miniaturize myself and live in her pocket. So that's gonna be exciting. If you don't know,
it's not creepy at all.
Not at all. No. The thing is, I'll tell her that too. Like, I'm not even embarrassed about it. So, and she's the type that would be like, no problem. So if you don't know who that is, you're not going to want to miss. Like, Amber is just like, oh, So anyway, yeah. So we've got some awesome stuff coming. But yeah, like we do need to take a moment to celebrate like 60 episodes of a podcast that was like, hey, you want to try this thing? And like, holy shit, here we are. And look at us. Look at what we did. And you're all here with us. And we're so thankful that you're here because we wouldn't still be doing it if people weren't listening. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's it exactly, right? Like it's huge. Over 16,000 downloads so far. People are like really into it, and that's fantastic. There's something about how like the vast majority of podcasts don't make it past the 7th episode. So like we're well and truly we're doing it.
Yeah.
And you're doing it with us. You're along for the ride. So that's fun.
I know. Thank you. It's super exciting. So wherever you are listening or wherever you hang out on social media, if you give us a like and a follow, we would be so excited. It does help us. What was I just looking at the other day? Oh, I know. In order to monetize on Spotify. So it's like there's 3 different criteria and we've met one of them, and the other 2, oh my gosh, no, not even close. So like anything, a like, a follow, whatever, we appreciate it. It makes our day. We put so much time and energy into the podcast and we love it, but it helps us kind of open new doors and open opportunities and bring on cool new guests and all that kind of stuff. Like the better our stats look. So like and follow wherever you are, share with a friend, give a review, whatever. We're just thankful for all of it. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, stay tuned all throughout the break. We're going to have awesome, what we're calling unfiltered bites. They'll be short episodes, and yeah, come hang out with us on our Facebook community, on Patreon. We'll still be there. So come hang out with us, and we'll talk to you soon. Happy homeschooling.
Yeah. Have a great one.